The relationship between us and our land. That is a work of thousands of years.
A new page in history is written today.
هنا صوت القدس.
This is Jerusalem calling.
والله يا جماعة الناس مش لاقية تاكل، كيف العاد بدها تدفع ديون والصهاينة قاعدين بياخذوا في أراضينا؟
The British court transferred your land to the settlers.
بلادنا عرفت ناس من ديانات كثيرة.
هذول هم جيران؟ هذول جايين يقعدوا محلنا مش معانا.
ولا راح يعملوا شيء الإنجليز، كلكم ليش عم نتسلى؟
We are asking for your help in protecting our villages.
I ask you all, have faith that Arab and Jew can live together. With your help, we can create a united and peaceful Holy Land.
We are looking for armed bandits.
We've shut down every Arab printing press. We set up checkposts and curfews. There has to be another way.
There isn't.
أنا بدي شهادة، ما حداش بدي.
عاشت الثورة! عاشت الثورة! إذا طخوني مين حيجيب محلي؟
أول مرة بحياتي خايفة أموت.
نحن عم نحارب عشان استقلالنا.
We're at the crossroads of a major moment in time. Consider which side of history you want to be on.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to session 3 of the course, Why Palestine 36 in Context, the Origins of Palestinian Revolutionary Struggle. So this is, as I mentioned, session 3 of a 4-part course. The first 2 were based in Los Angeles, and now we're here in New York, and it's great to be here with you all. My name's Dania. I'm with the People Center for Palestine. This course is being organized by the PCP in collaboration with TPF and Watermelon Pictures. And just as a little bit of an intro to the People Center for Palestine, we're a Palestinian institution. We're a resource and educational institution for the Palestinian diaspora and for the Palestine movement in North America. We're based in Orange County, California, which is why the first half of the course was based in LA. And in terms of some of the work that we do, we put on political education programming like this course. We focus a lot on Palestinian kids and youth education. So this upcoming summer, we're having our 2nd annual camp for Palestinian kids called Camp Palestine in Southern California. And we also do translation and publication work. Most recently, it's up here actually, Witness to the Hellfire of Genocide by Wasim Saeeds. So it's great to be here at TPF, and I know that some of you have been attending the course, and some of you might be joining for this one. So before I pass it over to and introduce the panelists for this session, I wanted to give a little bit of an intro of what the objectives of this course are. So the first one is around understanding this period of history that we saw captured here in this trailer, the revolution of 1936-39, as a foundational period of history in the Palestinian struggle that reveals the nature of the struggle, specifically as one against imperialism and colonialism. And so for session 1 and 2, we spent a lot of time going over the main events of the revolution, the conditions that led up to it, and the forces that were both on the side of the revolution and against it. Objective 2, we wanted to contextualize the film in relation to Ghassan Kanafani's, which is up here, the revolution of 1936-39 in Palestine. And so session 2 really focused on the book and what it offers, and the main argument and point of why we decided to ground this course in relation to this book is the analysis that Kanafani provides. It offers tools for us to understand, as I mentioned earlier, the forces for the Palestinian struggle and the forces against it really clearly. And then third and finally is we want to understand this film, Palestine 36, its significance as in relation to a longer history of Palestinian cultural production that preserves revolutionary history. And this is one example. First 2 sessions, we talked a lot about why is this history a threat to Zionism, and how has it been targeted by Zionists for decades, and the role of popular memory, the role of culture, the role of study in preserving and protecting Palestinian revolutionary history. So today, the goal of this session, why Palestine 36 matters today, was to invite panelists who can give us more depth to these objectives. Each of them, I'll introduce shortly, they work on this history in different ways, and they offer complementary perspectives that help us understand these questions more fully. So I'm going to start by introducing Khalid Audatullah, who's joining us from Palestine over Zoom. He's a Palestinian researcher, and he's a founder of the institution Suleiman al-Halabi Circle for Colonial Studies and Epistemic Liberation. And the goal of the projects under this institution is to produce liberatory knowledge and militant research that supports the Palestinian struggle. And some of the projects under this institution include Al-Janoub, the Palestinian Journal for Liberation Studies, the website Bab al-Wad, and the Popular University Palestine. And most recently, he published the book Sinja Siti Yamina, a Palestinian biography of the bayonets of imperialism. And we actually included a chapter of it in the course packet. I wanted to mention that he also organizes educational, like field-based learning. And one of those field-based tours, it's called Tours in the Military Historical Geography. And it focuses on specifically on the Bir Saba region in southern occupied Palestine. So you can find a lot of his research and work on the Bab al-Wad's website and also on YouTube and SoundCloud. So welcome, Khalid.
Thank you.
And so our next panelist is Alex Winder, who also has contributed a lot for our understanding of this period. Alex is a historian, thank you. Alex is a historian of modern Palestine with particular interest in law and lawbreaking. And he's the associate director of Brown University's Center for Middle East Studies and a senior fellow at the Institute for Palestine Studies. He also has served as editor of the Jerusalem Quarterly, and he edited, annotated, and introduced Between Jaffa and Mount Hebron, the diary of Muhammad Abdul Hadi al-Sharuf, which was published by the Institute of Palestine Studies. And his work has been, you can find his work in many different places, and we also included one of his pieces, which is titled Abu Jilda, Anti-Imperial Hero, Banditry, and Popular Rebellion in Palestine, which I recommend everybody read. So welcome to Alex. And then finally, Leanne Filihan, who I'm sure most everybody here probably knows as the education coordinator of the People's Forum. But I wanted to introduce her specifically in relation to this course. So she helped to edit the most recent English translation of Ghassan Kanafani's 1936-39 Revolution, which was published, I forget, it's in 2023 earlier. The border between 2022 and 2023. And she also wrote a great introduction to the book, to the translation called The Palestinian Cause is a Banner for All of Humanity. And we read it for course 1, and it framed some of the way we approached the book. I do want to say also that this work, her intervention with this work, it really comes out of her focus as a popular educator and organizer. And over the past now almost 2.5 years, she and the TPF have played a really great role, important role in contributing programming that contributes to the Palestinian liberation struggle. So thank you, Leanne, for being part of this. Okay, so I wanted to start with, I have a series of buckets of questions to get through based on these different areas we've been engaging. So the first one really has to do with the historical stakes of this history. And I wanted to start with you, Khalid, about really what ways this history has been maybe simplified or misused in the historical mainstream historical narratives.
Thank you for having me, and I hope I can contribute to this panel in a very useful and widening of knowledge. I think there is a lot of issues that when we are talking about the 1936, the great Palestinian rebellion or revolt, with dealing with the writing of the history of this revolt. Most of the writing of the history, although there's a lot of, let's say, work on doing the oral history of the revolt, but I think there's a lot of work that has to be done on this issue, particularly to capture the micro narratives of the rebellion and how the rebellion that started with the long historical process that what I can call the long history of the 1936 revolt that started from the World War I. And if we follow what happened in World War I in Palestine, that usually is framed as a clash of empires, and the ordinary people, the people of Palestine, they are always, let's say, marginalized in this history, as because of the, let's say, the historical resources were used mainly from the point of view of some elites, and a lot of, let's say, experiences and a lot of events that took place in the World War I military operation in Palestine was neglected from the point of view of the ordinary people once again. And in this long, let's say, period that extended for about 2 years of military operations, a lot of, let's say, the British were sowing the seeds of rebellion, of their atrocities and of their, let's say, alignment with the Zionist settlers that started from this period to take a shape of a collaboration between the empire and the settler. And we have to know that the first anti-peasant village massacre took place in 1918. And this was the massacre of the village of Sarafand al-Kharab. And it was one of its, let's say, main causes was the ongoing struggle of this village in particular and other villages against the settlers that was going for about 10 to 15 years before the war. And the other dimension that is very important, that a lot of the expertise, especially the military expertise that were utilized in 1936 revolution, were from Palestinian or Arab Ottoman soldiers that were part of the Ottoman army, and afterwards they became the trainers and the transferers of military knowledge that was used and utilized in 1936 or starting from the late 20s against the settlers in Palestine. So we have to, I think, locate the revolt in this long history, and we must always see the historical processes that brought to this revolt and the mobilization of the the peasants, starting from the first occasion of Balfour Declaration in 1918 and the protests in 1920 in Jaffa and Nabi Musa. There were always, like, these small streams that they were just, taken their way to be a river in 1936. So this is very important to go to this historical event, not just, to stick to the grand narratives. It is very important to acknowledge these small experiences and micro experiences for the people, that the peasants and the Bedouins, the atrocities that the British Army, especially the Anzac, the Australian army brigades, that especially took a very major part in these atrocities, plus, as I told you, about the experience of struggle, plus the arms themselves. Most of the arms that were used in the first clashes that started the revolution were the arms that the peasants and the Bedouins collected from the battlefields of World War I. So I think this the main thing that we must, or the main, let's say, the historical narrative that we must locate the 1936 revolt inside this narrative. The other thing that is very important, it's the fact that the revolt was not only against the British and the Zionists, they were also against the conventional leadership. This is very important because the conventional leadership that was established by the British bureaucracy, and it was constituted from the grand families and the landlords. They saw the British as a neutral power. They saw they can negotiate with the British to get the Palestinian rights from them. And they had this, let's say, false awareness that they distributed to the popular Palestinian communities that there's a difference between the British and the Zionists. And the fact that when Sheikh Azzeddin al-Qassam in his long, let's say, journey in building up the awareness of the masses and introducing the necessity of the organization for the effective struggle against the British and the Zionists, most of his work was of his long journey in this effort, and his success in this effort was due because he was outside the hegemony of the conventional leadership. So we must take always into consideration as a major fact in this long history, it was also against this conventional leadership, and it was always there's a dual, let's say, lines of struggle against the empire, against the settler, and against the leadership that was polarized and had a lot of, let's say, common interest between them and the British Empire.
Thank you, Khalid. I think you raised a lot of important points that hopefully we can get into more depth as the conversation continues. One of the points had to do with microhistories, and this is something that when we studied the past two sessions, we really were doing a big picture overview. Hello? Oh, it's somebody on Zoom. Okay. So we were doing this big picture overview, and I know that Alex, you have researched different individuals who have they were active before the revolution, that are maybe marginalized or less known, like Abu Jilda. So I wanted to ask you to share. You could share a story of one individual and what happens, what happens when we foreground them. What do we learn about the revolution by focusing on these figures?
Yeah, thanks, Tanya, and it's really nice to be here. Thank you for inviting me. It's great to be with Leanne and Khalid. So I'm always happy to talk about Abu Jilda. So those who don't know, Abu Jilda was a Palestinian from the village of Tamoun, which is in kind of the Jordan Valley. It's to the northeast of Nablus. And Abu Jilda came from a peasant background, and he became famous in 1933 and 1934 as basically a kind of outlaw figure, right? He had killed a policeman serving the British mandate, and there was a reward put out for his arrest, and he managed to kind of basically make the British authorities in Palestine look foolish for month after month after month, basically evading them. There was kind of stories about him robbing people in different places, attacking different Jewish settlements, Zionist settlements, attacking police. And he, in a way, was also a kind of product of the kind of Palestinian media landscape at this time, right? So this is when we're starting to see the press emerge in Palestine as something more popular, as education is increasing, literacy is increasing, and you see kind of the emergence of kind of more nationalist press. And he actually sent photos to the newspapers and had his photos published in the newspapers.
Smith, can we please stop posting these images on the web?
Of the British authorities.
I really want to stay focused on the meeting at hand.
There's lots of different things that are, for me, interesting. But one of the things that stands out in terms of thinking about someone
making
like
these whiteboards
in connection with the Great Revolt of 36, even though he precedes it by 2 or 3 years, right, is this idea of someone who comes from modest means, from a peasant background, a fallah, right, someone who is not from the elite families, doesn't kind of frame his interactions with imperial powers through sending delegations to meet with them or sending petitions, right? But someone who picks up a rifle and is kind of engaging them in kind of with arms. At the same time, he's able to kind of, someone from a very humble background, a peasant background, is making what is at that time the greatest empire, the most powerful empire in the world, right, the British Empire, to really make them look foolish, to make them look powerless. And I think there's, people would write kind of poetry about him. You have this kind of tradition of popular poetry. So those who watched the film, right, saw the fellahin in the fields kind of composing poetry kind of spontaneously, right? So he became kind of the subject of poetry. He became this kind of press figure. There was even kind of novels written about him at the time. And again, I think one of the things that it helps us think about is, what were the kinds of things that people said about him that people understood to be good qualities, right? So here's someone who's a peasant, not an elite, not educated, not from one of the leading families. But he was seen as kind of representing what Eric Hobsbawm calls like a social bandit, right? Someone who's like a Robin Hood type figure who steals from the rich and gives to the poor. I mean, the historical accuracy of that is maybe debatable, but certainly the kind of popular imagination was that like people are getting a bad deal, and if you steal from someone who's wealthy and you give it to someone who's not wealthy, that is a kind of justice that is absent in our day-to-day lives, right? We don't see justice happening. Justice is not being brought by the British. It's not being brought by the kind of notable Palestinian families who are claiming to represent us. We have to kind of go out on our own. If we want justice, we have to go out and kind of seek it for ourselves, right? So there's a certain kind of amount of kind of popularization of notions of justice, but I think kind of empowerment, but also this idea that people from these humble backgrounds can stand up to the British. And although eventually Abu Jilde is captured and he's hanged by the British, right, this kind of popular mythology around him, the way he is kind of seen as defiant even until the very end, kind of famously, his right-hand man, Al-Aramit, was said to have told his mother when he met her before his execution, like, give me a dagger so I can take it with me to be buried with a dagger, and kind of from beyond the grave, I'll like avenge my death, right? This kind of defiant up until the very end. And the idea that average Palestinians from humble backgrounds, falahin, like they can resist this enormous, powerful empire, and in fact that they have to. Justice is not going to happen unless you take action, right? Echoing what Khaled said, I think it's important to kind of look at these stories of people who aren't coming like from the elite backgrounds, the notable families, and kind of a lot of the history of Palestine up until 1948 especially is kind of told as the history of these major families who hold positions, the mayor of Jerusalem or the Haj Amin al-Husseini, the Grand Mufti, a position that was created by the British, right? So he's kind of put in power by the British. But really the kind of the dynamics, and one of the things that makes the 36 to 39 revolt so important is that it's really kind of the people who are taking action, who are kind of, they are the agents of history, right? And then kind of thinking about the ways in which this history of this uprising of 1936 has this longer history, right, as Khaled mentioned, right? It has roots in World War I. It has roots in kind of a lot of the ways in which people organized themselves in 1936 into what were kind of ways that had longer roots based on village connections, people who were rural to urban migrants. So the character of Khaled in the film, right, is a kind of someone who's rural and then goes and works in the docks in Haifa, right? This is happening to a lot of people in Palestine in the 1920s, 1930s. They're being forced off their land because it's being sold out from under them, or because they can't afford to pay the taxes, or because it's just not profitable anymore as Palestine's kind of integrated into a global capitalist economy, right? That kind of people are being forced to move to Haifa, move to other kind of urban centers where they're kind of working in different kinds of jobs. And those are the kind of networks that then become the backbone of the revolt in 1936, right? These connections that people made, they're village connections, but also these connections that they've made through kind of working together on the docks, or working together in the rail yards, or working on the oil pipeline, right? These things that are transforming Palestine, but are also kind of bringing people together in new ways.
Thank you, Alex. Lan, I wanted to ask you, you have this perspective into some of the interests in this history. We have some sense with the film, Palestine 36, but the book, and just why do you think more people are interested in studying this history now, and what's the significance of studying it in this current political, I don't know if we should call it a moment, but since October 2023, really.
Well, interestingly, we started working on the book, we were moved to work on a new translation of this particular text before this new chapter of history that we're in right now started, well before October 2023. And our reasons for doing that then are very different than perhaps the reasons why we may be pushing it now, but also kind of connected. So I might draw out both of them. When we first actually sat down and said this is a text that needs to get into the hands of young people, and in particular we were thinking about different kinds of young people. We were thinking first and foremost of the Palestinian diaspora, which has been over the past few decades, especially in the Americas, has been completely divorced from the kind of intergenerational knowledge about the Palestinian struggle, about Palestinian culture, and also about the complexity and richness of the Palestinian political tradition. There's part of that divorcing between generations has also meant that the young generation hasn't had access to the kinds of political debates and political texts that are very vibrant inside Palestinian society and that have driven the history of resistance for over a century. And when we looked at the way Kanafani's work was being distributed among English-speaking people, because of course one of the reasons or one of the ways in which young generations in the diaspora are disconnected from their roots is also because of the language barrier, because of not being able to read complicated texts in Arabic or participate in political dialogues. And Kanafani's texts that were really circulating in English were majority the fictional texts, which I think is so important, and we all think are so important and are very moving and are very important also for political reasons. But this text in particular offered a window into the way of not only understanding not only what this history of the 1936 revolt was, the 1936 revolution was, but also the way in which Kanafani approached it. He used a very specific Marxist analysis to understand the 1936 moment, and he did it in a very accessible way. It's the way the text is organized, its conciseness, but also its detail really helps the reader see why he's studying 1936 and what are the lessons that he's drawing from 1936. Then, of course, October 2023 happened, and the movement in solidarity with Palestine completely changed the world. And young people became the motor force of this, and in particular, young Palestinian and young Arab people became the motor force of this all over the world, not just in the Americas. And now we're in a moment where, I mean, back when we were starting to work on this text, if you randomly asked someone between the ages of 18 and 30, what do you think of Palestine, or what do you think of the Nakba, or what do you think of this? Majority of the time you won't get an answer because it's not something that had been available to people. Now everyone knows what Palestine is. Everyone knows about the Palestinian struggle. People feel they feel connected to it, even if they are not Palestinian. They see what happened in Palestine as a window into what is happening to the whole world. They see the Palestinian people also as a people who are standing up and fighting against the biggest machinery of oppression all over the continents. And so the interest in what actually has made the Palestinian cause what it is, I think comes partly from that too. People are inspired by the Palestinian cause. People are invested in it. People want to know what's going to come next. And in order to know what's going to come next, well, we can't know what's going to come next, but in order to be able to start getting ready for what's going to come next, we have to know what came before. A lot of the work that happened in terms of, I would say, more popular education or popular history, or what the SJPs had been doing for years before the SJPs now have become very well-known elements in the university sphere. I think it's something like 95% of college students feel that they are pro-Palestine now, which is a complete reversal. The SJPs did a lot of really important work over the past decade and a half in having people understand the Nakba, the 1948 Nakba. But this history is so important to help people take the next step. Khaled was talking about this, and Alex too. You can't really know you can't really deeply understand. You can't go deeper into the history of what has produced the set of conditions that we are struggling against right now if we don't know where that came from. And I think the 1936 episode in the long arc of the Palestinian struggle, this is Kanafani's argument, which is why we thought this text was also very important. But his argument is that the defeat of the 1936 to 39 revolution, the defeat in 1939, created the conditions that allowed the Nakba to happen. And if we don't understand that, then we can't struggle against it now, because that is that has set the stage for the phase of struggle that we're in now. So I think the interest is important. I hope that more people are interested in it. I think the movie, and I know we'll talk about this more later, but the film is also going to help for that, because it's important that people know this history. It gives a much clearer picture of the forces at work right now that the Palestinian cause is up against, but also the forces that are now in competition for the future of the entire globe. So we're seeing that play out in other arenas. And I think the approach that we have been going through in this course, but also that the film helps also take us on as well, will be helpful in strengthening everyone's ability to understand the current political moment in all of its complexity.
Thank you. Yeah. So one of the things that we learned from the past two sessions is, and from this book, is that you see so clearly the relationship between Zionism and imperialism consolidate in this period. And so I wanted to ask Khaled, to share a bit, because you've researched this and worked on this, what did the relationship, like the British Zionist counterinsurgency, look like during the revolution, and how do we see what was developed in that period today?
Okay, once again, when the issue of the relationship between Zionism and imperialism is raised, it's always raised in the, let's say, a more strategic view, and a lot of the let's say micro events are marginalized. I think they are very important to understand this relationship. It's not a matter of only a strategic alliance or ideological, let's say, landscape that both share, but if we study these micro sites of this relationship, I think it will give us a more accurate and a more, let's say, view from the lived experience. I think the pivotal development in Zionist army and I say the army doctrine of genocide and fascist doing in when you take the army as most of the view of armies that you're talking about strategies and tactics. But I think the most important thing we have to do is to look about the ethos, about the moral buildup that was done in the relationship that was established during the 1936, especially after the second phase of the revolt in September 1937, when Ord Wingate, he's a main figure in the film, was the locus of shaping this relationship on the land. And this took the shape of introducing the Zionist militias, the Haganah, as troops in the army that joined enjoyed this, let's say, location that it works inside the army, and in the same time it was outside the army itself. And this made it possible for the British to use or to wage atrocities against the villages, and at the same time afterwards they established this view that this was done by this lunatic that was called Ord Wingate, as he was an ordinary soldier, imperial soldier. First of all, when Wingate came here with his Christian Zionist background, he was very keen to establish relationships with the Yishuv. He learned Hebrew, and he was very, let's say, confident that when you are supporting the Zionist movement, you are on the right side of the history, as we hear a lot on these days. And he established what was called the Special Night Squads. And these were small groups that most of the members of these groups came from the settlers in the Yishuv, especially from Ain Harod Yishuv. And they carried out night campaigns against the villages. And these campaigns were based on terrorizing the village and terrorizing the people, not as an act of, let's say, an army that is, doing the traditional counterinsurgency. It was introduced that the terror is the main concept and the main strategy to repulse the revolt. Doing so, the aspect of this development concerning the settlers was, first of all, getting them out of behind the fences that they were used to fight behind the fence and waiting for the Palestinian insurgents to come and attack the settlers. He learned them the hard way. If they want to succeed and if they want to survive in this hostile Arab environment, they must penetrate deep into the villages before the villages come to them. And the second thing, his emphasis on doing so in the night. And if you join these two aspects together, you will see that we are talking about the philosophy of the Zionist special forces in the Israeli occupation army until this day, work to penetrate to the hostile, what they call the hostile environment, and first of all to wage a terrorist attack, a shock attack among the villages or among the communities that can produce or will or possibly produce resistance against the Israelis. And the other most important thing that we must take into consideration, that their work was not always always in the arena of revenge. In the Hula Valley, they were used as a pre-stage for introducing a calculator, a Palestinian calculator from a noble family to the Hula Valley. They were introduced in this area so as to eliminate the resistance, so as the newcomer, this guy from Al Khalsa village, a landlord of Khalsa village, that he can establish his authority on the Hula Valley so as to facilitate transferring large amounts of areas of lands to the Zionist project. So the terror was used in this case not as a punishment or a revenge or as a counter-insurgency or insurgency tool. It was used for a political tool too, to make it possible for a collaborator with the British and the Zionist movement to establish his authority in a very strategic, important area, as in the Hola Valley. So we're talking about, multidimensional, let's say, buildup of the Israeli ethos that they are using it until this day. The philosophy of penetrating the communities, the terror, the night terror, doing it by special forces or bombing from the air, plus what they are, the long scale, or the long, let's say, time frame for this work is to establish a suitable area for a collaborator to come, and this is what they did in Gaza, and we can see it. And this is what they did after the Second Intifada, and when Salam Fayyad came and he re-engineered the whole Palestinian society in the West Bank. And when we see this, this connection, and when we see the core ethos of the Israeli military that was built and introduced by Wingate in this area, in this time frame, in the 1936-1939 revolt, we can see what is happening right now. It was the lessons that Wingate introduced to the Zionist movement. Until this day, on annual basis, the Zionist army plus the other branches of their security agencies, plus the shelters, they held up a ceremony for Wingate. It's usually done on November each year, and always they emphasize the lessons that Wingate learned them. And the main, the main lesson is terror. If you cannot wage terror on the Palestinians or on the Arabs, you can't survive in this area. And this is the ethos that is continued, and we can see the genocide in Gaza is based on this ethos that was built by Wingate and other Zionists that established the core of the newborn Israeli army, like Moshe Dayan and others that were active members in the special night squads. And we can see this linkage that the empire introduced this this tool, the terror tool. It was introduced by the empire and used to counter the insurgents, plus to establish a ground for the incoming collaborators. That usually what happens when you hear these days about regime change. I think all of these issues that we see today are established on this. We have to use military force to terrorize the people, so as make it possible for others to come as rescuers for a terrorized, shocked societies. And this is what happened in 1936 when Wingate and his night squads, that the Zionist settlers were the majority of these squads, contributed to the defeat of the 1936-39 revolt.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, Ord Wingate, he's the main character in the film, which if you've seen it already, you know that, but you'll see. And I think one of the ways he can be talked about is, like, as you discussed, almost like a lunatic or fringe. But his ideology as a Christian Zionist, he played this formative role in not just building up what became the occupation forces, but these tactics being systematically a part of the military doctrine. And I know, Alex, that you researched the police under the mandate, the colonial mandate. So I wanted to ask basically the same question, but about the police. What was the role of the British colonial police in this period, and is there any legacy today that we can see?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in many ways it's similar, like the police and the military are working hand in glove. I think in this period, the period of the revolt, what you see is this kind of facade that that the British supported Zionism but did not support the Haganah, for example, the kind of armed wing of the Zionist movement. That kind of facade disappears in the revolt, right? It becomes, they create Jewish settlement police who are kind of allowed to carry arms, and it's basically that that these are kind of openly Haganah units who are kind of provided weapons by the British, and kind of you have this kind of buildup of infrastructure. We also see in the film the figure of Charles Taggart, who's a British police expert who comes from West Bengal to Palestine during the revolt to teach the British in Palestine, the British police in Palestine, what he's learned through the kind of British colonial rule in India, right? And what we see there is really an emphasis on space, like controlling space. It's important to keep the Palestinian population limited in terms of space and allow freedom of movement for British forces and Zionist forces, right? So you see that through the construction of a kind of barbed wire fence wall in the north of Palestine, right, that's mentioned in the film. I mean, I don't think it's, it doesn't take too much of a leap of imagination to see the relevance to the more recent past, right? The construction of a wall in Palestine to reduce the presence, to kind of impose a permit regime, right? So that Palestinians cannot travel to certain places unless they hold a permit. To build these Taggart forts, which are kind of police stations. So instead of having a police station that's kind of open, that is kind of just there as a police station, it's a kind of complex where the police live in the complex. It's surrounded by walls, and there's a prison usually within the complex as well. These Taggart fortresses continue. You can visit some of them, like in Palestine today. They still exist. They're often reused by the Israelis after 1948. They're reused by the Palestinian Authority when they in the West Bank, right, often reused as police stations, prisons, right? So you can see this continuity of the same kinds of infrastructure being used. I think in many ways, colonies are always laboratories for repression, right? And we see Palestine operating this way from 1936 to 39. We see it in Gaza more recently, right? This idea that there's kind of, this is an opportunity for colonial forces to operate, to improvise, to develop new technologies, new methods, relatively unchecked, right? So I feel like I've been listening to podcasts about AI and military, which are responding in many ways to the way AI has been used for the U.S.-Israeli attacks on Iran. But of course, Israel has been using AI in Gaza and in throughout Palestine, right? So that these are kinds of seeing the ways that these moments tend to produce new kinds of forms of repression that then are replicated elsewhere, right? So in Palestine, this expertise and police forces that serve in Palestine in the 1930s, then after the revolt is repressed, go on to serve in Malaya, right, and then are used to repress the kind of anti-colonial uprising there. They go to Kenya and they are used to repress the Mau Mau rebellion there, right? This kind of way in which we have these kind of circulations of personnel, of ideas, of expertise, of technologies, of infrastructure. So we see certainly kind of it's happening in Palestine in the sense that things that are developed or practices that are developed, infrastructure that's built between 1936 to 39 continues to be used afterward, but we also see it kind of moving beyond Palestine. And I think that's important to keep in mind as well, right? Laleh Khalili has written about this really well. I think that kind of Palestine is one major point in these kind of circulations of colonial knowledge, colonial techniques, colonial repression. And so that's certainly kind of on the policing end. And we see, again, kind of the line between policing and military, always in colonial contexts, that line is a blurred one, but especially when we're kind of dealing with a kind of anti-colonial revolt and counterinsurgency, that line is really kind of disintegrates, right? And we see it kind of, although martial law is never declared, the kind of the ways in which the legal system, kind of an exceptional legal regime is established, then gets replicated in the 1940s, and then that kind of continues after 1948 when the Israeli government says, like, we're going to continue to use the same laws, right? But those same laws allow for the kind of military rule of Palestinians within the state up until 1966, right? All these different ways that kind of this, again, is a kind of pivotal moment, a crucial moment where we see kind of whether it's Wingate, whether it's Tegart, whether it's other kinds of people whose names are not as familiar, but this kind of, that Palestine in this moment becomes a kind of key node in this kind of these circulations of again, kind of carceral ideas and technologies.
Thank you. So I'm going to shift to this question about cultural production, but of course you guys are welcome to return to what we just discussed. So the revolution, it really was a period where the Palestinian popular classes waged a huge threat against one of the largest powers in the world, and while it ended in the conditions that led to the Nakba, this history, it's a threat to the Zionist project, and so this is something we talked about a lot, especially in the first course. So Leanne, I know you mentioned that some of the reason why the decision to translate the book had to do with introducing it to new generations of, especially Palestinians in the diaspora. So this is a period of history, though, that across generations, Palestinians have returned back to. And that's actually how that history has been protected because of this process. So are there any threads that you've seen carried across generations, and what are some of the lessons that you'd hope those committed to the Palestinian struggle today would glean, from this studying this history?
Well, I guess I could maybe, there's so many things that one could say about this topic, but to maybe focus on two. One thread that I think has been, as you have said, kind of preserved through many generations of people, historians and other kinds of people who have looked to 1936, is a real understanding of what Zionism is and where it came from. Because the story of the revolution in 1936 is also the story of the coalescence of Zionism as a force, which of course began before 1936, but it starts to kind of become mobilized in a different way in that chapter of history. And it helps us overcome a very one-dimensional idea of what Zionism is and give it the kind of complexity that we need to know, that we need to have around what Zionism is. It is an imperial force. It's an imperial ideology. It's a colonial ideology, but it's also not something that exists just in and of itself. In the story of 1936, it is kind of brought into being by the British colonial empire. Now we also cannot understand Zionism without understanding its complete dependency on US imperialism. And that translates also into its, not just it as a political and colonial force today in Palestine, and it's materially exists because of its support, the material support that US imperialism gives it, but also culturally. It can't culturally exist either without the kind of cultural production that US imperialism also produces. So I think that's something that has been emphasized by the different historians who have treated this history, and I'm sure that Khaled and Alex can speak in even more detail to that. But the other element that I think is so important, and that maybe actually the most important thing for the people who are just coming to this history right now, is a window or a perspective into the history of Palestine that centers the organization of the everyday people. Khaled was talking about this. Oftentimes when we study history in a kind of, I would say, normalized way here in the United States, we either study it as great events, like capital G, great events. It's in very broad terms, or about great men, and it's about the particular individual leaders of a particular moment. It's not studied as from the perspective of what were the organized movements of masses of people. What did entire classes of people do? And of course, sometimes that's not all organized under one vehicle. It's not all one kind of like, it's one organization with one plan. But you can see that it's actually, in the history of 1936, you can see that it actually is a history of masses of everyday people interacting with different layers of leadership and different kinds of leadership against different kinds of leadership, generating new forms of leadership. But without the collective action of all sectors of Palestinian society, this story would not exist. And oftentimes when we hear the history of the Palestinian struggle, that element is missing. The things that are emphasized are the occupation, the occupiers, the violence of the occupation, perhaps some of the main characters that people can hold on to, which is also, I think, very important. But the reality of the entire society of the Palestinian people are engaged in some way or another in a form of resistance against the occupation and against imperialism. That part is de-emphasized, and it is impossible to ignore in the history of 1936. So I think I'm kind of losing exactly what your question was, but those would be the two things that I think would be the most important. And it's hard to communicate those things without, especially when it's almost 100 years away, 90 years away, without trying to paint a picture of the kinds of people that engaged in those things. What was their life like? Why did the peasants start to make poetry randomly in the, like, off the top of their head while they're working? Like, why? Where did that come from? Who were the women involved? What did they do? Why did people decide they're going to go on a general strike? Why did they engage in armed struggle? What were the actual motivations, the human motivations, and how did they make the connections to be able to act in concert? Those are the kinds of questions that get left out of a history. And Kanafani and others have been able to tell that because they made sure to tell that story, but also you need cultural production to really be able to tell that story. We actually have to know what the poetry was, and we have to imagine someone singing it. A film or a novel or another thing that can kind of focus on the human emotion of being in that moment or give a different picture can also help tell the story in a different way. So in terms of the cultural historical telling, I think that that's an element that's actually so important to the survival of history. If we don't have cultural production, then maybe we'll know what happened or the timeline of what happened, but in terms of being able to actually grasp the lessons of it, we as human beings who are looking backwards also have to be able to see human beings in that history too.
Yeah, this is a really important point. It's something that we've talked about a bit first two courses, this point about what gets left out of the history, but also if we want to include it, how it's very difficult given the way that both Zionist project has targeted this history and the stealing of history. So one example is even in Palestine 36, the attempt to recreate the weapons. This was a huge effort to actually do, because a lot of these were stolen during the Nakba. So this is something that's really important. And I wanted to ask you, Khalid, how do we deal with that? How do we deal with the gaps and the theft, the silences when it comes to the historical record, given this? And how has Palestinian cultural production, even intellectual production, worked to counter this?
I think the main challenge here is, to distinguish between writing history or history and collective memory. What makes history mobilizing energy is the transforming of this knowledge into the collective memory of the people, so as to make it to make it a force in our present, not something that we always get back to it as studying it on the academic level. I'm not saying that doing academic work is not important. It's very important, but I think when we are dealing with cultural or knowledge production in colonial and anti-colonial struggle, I think we have to develop a special philosophy of dealing with history and dealing with the circulation of the historical knowledge that we can transfer into a live experience in the people. I think what we must always, focus on is that when we are talking about the wisdom, not the lessons of these struggles, as mentioned, the importance of organization or organizing the masses. I think this is the most difficult and the most challenging issue that all revolutionary parties and struggles are right now facing. There's no clear, let's say, working strategy how we can transfer our discussions, how we can transfer our ideologies, how can we transfer our political views and agendas into a working force on the ground. And when we reach this issue, it's always a matter of what kind of organization or what kind of collective work can be done and can be effective in our time right now. The other thing that I want to talk about is the crucial issue of circulating knowledge. A lot of the times talking about revolutions and talking about great events is always circulated among a very small number of people because of the language that we are using. And here we have to to renew the let's say the native and the popular ways of engaging with the revolutions, like popular poetry and other ways, and to reintroduce the philosophy of this mechanism of transforming this sophisticated ideas into a knowledge that the ordinary people can, exchange thought about, and they can use it in their everyday struggles. The other thing that must be always in mind is the comprehensive view of the national struggle. if I want to go back to the what Izzeddin al-Qassam was doing for about 25 years before the revolution, this is, I think, must be well studied, is linking the national struggle with the labor struggle in the trade unions and labor working committees in Haifa. And he was very aware that you cannot build a national struggle without, expanding the lines, the struggle lines to all the society points of clash with the Zionists, with the empire, and with the conventional leadership. So when we're talking about national struggles, we're talking about class struggles, we're talking about how to merge all of these lines of struggles together, because the failure of the 1936, and though I think most of the failures in our history in Palestine, was the continuous reproduction of corrupted, collaborated elites after each revolution. We do great revolutions, but always we fail to make a structural change in the society so as afterwards those who are anti or those who have interest or waiting for the moment that after the dust of the battles will go down, they will take the leadership again. And this cannot be done without infusing the social, economic struggle with the national struggle. So when we are talking about what kind of cultural or knowledge production, we have to always, combine all these aspects together. It's not a matter of emphasizing the imperial or the Zionist movement, and this was partly done in the film, but I think it needed to be more it was a brave moment in the film, talking about the collaborator, this journalist, but the deep structure of cooperation was not issued in the film. I think this is very important. It's not a matter of this guy that was paid by the Zionists to write some articles in the newspaper. We're talking about what happened in the peace bands that took a very active role in repressing the revolution, and what it was based on family loyalties that they were seeing that the peasants took the leadership, that they don't this is not their right. They took the right of leadership from them because of their economic background. So I think that we have to work very hard in developing a philosophy of knowledge production and cultural production that take all of these factors in mind, plus a very important thing, the critical ethos that must always be there. Because always when we are talking about building mass mobilization, it's not a matter of just awareness about the enemies, it's a matter of always checking our camp too, how we can build alliances. This is very important too. What kind of common ground that we have to look so as to bring the greatest number of people to be engaged in the struggle. All of these issues, when we let's say talk about the cultural and knowledge production, must be addressed, because there's a lot of works that are done on the history of 1936 revolution, but very little of these works find their way to the public collective memory, and we need to work on this issue. And we work, and of course we hear the different various cultural aspects, production aspects like art, the visuals, a lot of things that can be done to to make all of this ideas and all of this awareness about what happened part of the daily experience that can be utilized in the struggle today.
Thank you. So we're going to turn it over to Q&A in a second, but before I do that, I just wanted to ask how many of you have seen, I know Palestine 36 hasn't been released in the US yet, but I'm curious, has anybody who's seen it, and if you can raise your hands, including, okay, 2 in the audience, and then the panel. Okay, so the film's going to be released, I don't know the exact date, but we have Annemarie, the director of Palestine 36, with us here at TPF March 18th, and the film is being released right around that time here in New York, and then nationally after that. So while we have you who all have this expertise on the history, just really quick response, like 2 minutes max. What's your analysis and impression of the film? And you can go in the order that you want to go.
I'll start. I mean, I think one of the things I found really important about the film touches on what Leon said, right? The idea that kind of we need these kind of individual stories that connect to larger stories in order to kind of think about how do people, we have this, like the revolt of 1936 begins with this, months-long general strike, right? What motivates people to continue that strike even when it is causing significant personal hardship, right? To kind of understand that, to kind of think about, well, what are these kind of, how do personal motivations connect with larger movements and struggles? I think one of the things that I think it does well is we see kind of in different characters some of the kind of really the core of the revolt, of the people who were active and engaged in it were rural Palestinians, rural to urban migrants, and this kind of newly emerging kind of upwardly mobile, educated class that was dissatisfied with the traditional elites, right? So we see there's main characters. So Rabab, the kind of is one of the main characters who represents that kind of rural background. We have Khalid, who represents the kind of rural to urban migrant, and we have Yusuf, who represents that kind of upwardly mobile class. So I think there's ways in which it kind of is useful for thinking about the different components of Palestinian society. I think, there's one of the things I liked about it as well was the kind of reminders that the Palestinian struggle is not and was not then disconnected from other struggles in the region, right? So, there's a uprising in Egypt in 1919, in Iraq in 1920, in Syria in 1925, and people who were engaged in Palestine, in the Palestinian revolt, were Palestinians for the most part, but also people from Jordan, from Syria, from Lebanon, who did not see Palestine as separate from their own struggles, right? And I think that's addressed kind of specifically in the film in a moment, but there's hints as well. So there's a bus that we see in the film that is the route is Damascus to Jerusalem, right? A route that is no longer active, right? Or a poster at the very beginning that says travel from London to Baghdad by rail, and it's in the Jerusalem train station, right? That I think it's important for us to think about the film, but also the history, right? Palestine is not separate from the region, and we have to kind of maintain that connection. And I think those kind of reminders in the film that these things are connected, I think is an important thing to keep kind of to keep present in our analysis.
Okay, I'll go quickly. I mean, I'm so excited about the film. I think everyone should be so excited about it because, I mean, look at the beautiful posters, the amazing trailer, the level of production. How many times do we get to see in theaters a film that tells our story? And by that, I don't just mean is about Palestine, because there's so many amazing films that are about Palestine or that are set in Palestine or made by Palestinians and tell the story of what it means to be a Palestinian, but there's so few political films about any peoples that tells the story about the masses of people in motion, which is one of the themes of our discussion. It's very hard to do that, but it's also been de-emphasized on purpose. Like, which Hollywood film have we seen about any war that's not about like the one hero guy who, you know, turned the tables all by himself? That's the kind of narrative that sells. And instead, this is the kind of narrative that inspires people to get together and to work together, to act together, to learn together. The film is a dramatic telling of what happened in 1936. So we can't ask the film to tell us all of the analysis and all of the economic conditions and all of the political conditions and all of the cultural conditions. The film is, for us, I think, one of those ways that can help start building the bridge between analysis and collective memory. I really like the phrasing that Khaled gave to us. So I think the film is something that I feel so enthusiastic about. I think that people should enjoy going to see it in the theater, and it's a sign, the fact that we can have this film, the fact that Annemarie was able to make this film and that it's being shown in so many theaters, I think is also a sign of the turning point in terms of public culture that we're in right now. This is the kind of cultural production that we need. We need more of this, and I hope it inspires more people to make more films and more art along these lines.
Khaled, do you want to share your thoughts on the film?
It's always very, very, let's say, unpleasant experience when somebody that is working in history watching a historical film, because he's always, you know, checking the facts and what is missing there, what is it's accurate or not. But I think if we want to, let's say the global impact of such film, I think the issue that was addressed is not was let's say part of the agenda, but it's the matter of the timing. And when we are talking about colonialism, we cannot, and the current situation in the colonial genocidal era that Israel reintroduced to the world after more than about from the World War II, the people of the world thought that the concept of genocide, that it was a part of the history, it must be learned as a historical project, not something of the current affairs. I think the important thing about the timing of the film is re-establishing the awareness or the global awareness that colonialism is linked with the rise of fascism, and how the issue of the repression, the terror that was used in the colonies always finds its way back to the metropole. And what happens there don't stay in the colonies. It always travels to the metropole and will be used. The algorithmic fascism that was used in Gaza genocide, it will be used there as surveillance tactics, and eventually it will be produced. It will produce all of this AI hype that everybody is talking about. It's a matter of it's reproducing the colonization of other people to colonization of the lives in the world, the colonization of all the aspects of life on of the people, in their privacy, and their even on their cognitive operations in their mind. They are targeting this in the same logic. They are targeting people in the colonies. So I think we must expand the reception of the film to make it not only something that is talking about something that happened in what is called the Middle East in the 30s. This is relevant today, not only in the matter of solidarity with the Palestinian people. It's relevant to once again, to the rise of this techno-fascism that is on rise on the West right now. And from this point of view, we can call it a global event if we manage to reintroduce this in this ethos. I want to go back once again to 1936, and there was a very important, let's say, a side history of this revolution is the contribution of the Palestinian fighters in fighting in Spain, the Franco-fascist movement too. So, and this was an awareness that fascism has its origins in colonialism, and this makes this will, I think, should establish our awareness is not a matter, once again, of other people, solidarity from the West with Palestinians or any other people. It's a matter of the union of struggle. We are facing the same enemy here and there, because once again, we're talking about this global fascist structure that is developing and taking a place in our eyes, that in the 21st century, we're seeing genocide live, and not a lot of things change in this world. Nothing stopped. And I think this is a very terrifying fact, must be dealt and must be always kept in mind when we are discussing anything that is linked to colonial struggle and colonial repression, like what happened in 1936.
Thank you. So I'm sure you all have your own questions, and so it's time for Q&A. If you have a question, raise your hand. And
Thank you. Sorry, this is like a broader question, and it follows, the culmination of the past 3 sessions, but overall focusing on the revolution of 36. I'm kind of curious, what do you think maybe you would categorize as the weaker elements of the revolution, in the sense of like, what were the stronger points of the revolution, and what did it need to build upon to maybe have a different outcome? And what can we learn from that for our current movement now? Was there a disconnect with the worker struggle, maybe with the peasant struggle? Was there a disconnect with the regional struggle or global imperialism at the time?
thank you. We can take a few more questions if there's others, either from Zoom or in the room.
I was wondering, this is for the person of Palestine. How do you think we can, in the West Bank and just the Palestinian people, as you know, with the roads being closed, the borders between like 48ers and people in the West Bank and between Gaza, how do you think we can kind of unify despite that and get through into a more of a unified movement from within?
We have a couple questions on Zoom we can go to, if you want to add them right now, or you want to keep taking some.
Why don't we just take one more, and then we can go to the panelists.
Okay. Yeah, so one from Zoom. Can the panelists talk about their take on the reaction of the rest of the Arab world to what happened between 1936 to 39 in Palestine, especially in Iraq? And I would add also, I'm curious if there's anything about the revolution in Syria. I think Syria, Lebanon at that time also. I think, in the movie as well, there's allusions to it, and not much has been written. I don't know much about it, so just wanted to know if anyone on the panel has information or knows where we could find some more.
I'll let you guys take them as you like. Maybe we could start with Khalid, since there was a question directly to you, and then we can. Okay.
What happened in the historical Palestine, in the West Bank, in Jerusalem, the Zionist colonial regime has divided all of Palestine to various, let's say, zones of repression and this introduced on the long term this false awareness that what happened, let's say, in Gaza, it is isolated from the rest of the Palestinian society. There is hard question to be asked, and it's harder to be answered, because what happened after the genocide showed the failure of all the political elites in the Palestine, the failure of all the civil society organizations, and everybody tuned up his strategy and, let's say, awareness of the struggle within the limits that Israel imposed on us before the genocide. And it was very hard to reawake after the shock. And we are now witnessing, after, it's not a matter of Gaza. We have to, remember or to emphasize that what happened to Gaza happened on a micro level on the northern West Bank, in the Jenin camp and Tul Karim and Qalqilia. Ethnic cleansing was done to the camps and destroying of the camps and aerial bombardment to the camps and other areas there on daily basis until now. So it's very hard right now to talk about what must be done or because we don't have until now a serious, first of all, critique of our failure to deal with the genocide inside Palestine, not outside Palestine. I'm not talking about the Palestinian diaspora too. They are very hard questions, and nobody has until now a suitable answer what must be done. The thing that what is happening on everyday basis, that the Israelis, also the Zionists, transferred what the army operations into the settlers operations, and they are acting like militias. They are terrorizing all the villagers in the areas that they are establishing as a future areas for settler expansion. The BA is not only paralyzed until, let's say, I think before 2, 3, 4 days they arrested resistant fighters too. And most of let's say, the student movement in universities, most of them were, attacked by the PA and the Israelis, and they were the only, say, location for or hope for renewing the mass struggle and protest. So on this day, the thing that what is happening right now in the villages, and that Israel after the genocide spread about 1,000 iron gates around and disclosed villages areas. I think the people right now their resistant ethos is just, you know, the minor requirement of just sumud, the basic, just being there. I don't see that. I don't think that this paralyzing moment will continue. But unless we are right now, you know, engaged in very deep, serious, critical questioning about our ability to act politically and to, you know, to wage a struggle in a minimum meaning of struggle, I think we won't go out. It won't be easy to get out of this paralyzing situation.
I'll say a few things maybe about the kind of regional context. I mean, really good questions and difficult questions. I think one of the things that I think is important to keep in mind is that, so in 1937, the British sent this, you know, commission, the Peel Commission, and basically to see how to resolve or to kind of find a solution to the problem of Palestine, right? The Peel Commission recommended partition of Palestine into Jewish and Arab states. And this was something that kind of energized the second phase of the revolution, right? That basically kind of the Palestinians were not willing to accept the partition of Palestine. Now, in 1939, although the British, on the one hand, they expend a huge amount of kind of military force and kind of police power in crushing the revolt, they also basically go back on the Peel Commission recommendations, right? They issue a white paper that says, we're not going to partition Palestine. Palestine will be independent after a period of 10 years, and we're going to limit Jewish immigration up to that period. Now, that doesn't basically come to happen, right? We know that that's not, you know, we don't have a unified, independent Palestine. In large part because of kind of global events, right, World War II. But I think it's important to kind of see that also as, if not a complete victory for the revolution, it was like the British had to go back and say, we're going to make more concessions to what the Palestinians want, right? They don't want partition, they want independence. And so I think it's important to also kind of, although we know that again, that the revolution doesn't achieve its aims, that like its failure is also kind of connected to these other global forces that are outside of the control of Palestinians, right? And that's important. And part of that too is the kind of regional dimension in which the British and the French have essentially installed kind of puppet states around Palestine, right? Whether it's the British in Egypt, Jordan, and Iraq, the French in Lebanon and Syria, right? That when the kind of leaders, quote unquote, of these regional states are asked to intervene and negotiate Palestine on behalf of kind of the Arabs, quote unquote, for Palestine's future, these are deeply compromised figures who basically hold their positions because the British have installed them, allow them to hold those positions, etc. At the same time, I think, you know, after we see kind of the overthrow of the Iraqi regime in the 1940s, right? That kind of, this is a deeply unpopular position to support the British over and the Zionists over the Palestinians. That the people everywhere are always have kind of consistently been in favor of the kind of broad contours of the Palestinian struggle and Palestinian liberation. And so there is kind of popular support for the Palestinian uprising, even if the leaders of these states are in many ways conspiring against the uprising, right? At the same time, these kind of, I think we can see that 1939 decision by the British to reverse the Peel Commission recommendations as an effort to kind of to produce something in Palestine that's more similar to what we see in Iraq, in Syria, Lebanon, et cetera, right? The idea that instead of kind of committing themselves to the Zionist project and having that be their kind of local ally in Palestine, to try to kind of think about some alternative where you have a kind of local Palestinian leadership that is a compliant leadership working with the British. But of course, even those, like in what happens in Syria in the 1920s, right, you have this uprising. Eventually, the French strike a deal where they grant a kind of limited, kind of a greater degree of kind of democracy in order for, and kind of Syrian elites are able to kind of maneuver more freely. And so, for example, during the Palestinian Revolution, you have Palestinian leadership based in Damascus, right? So I don't think that, like, maybe this answer isn't like offering much clarity, but it's to think that, like, these are not kind of zero-sum games, that in many ways, like, it's not to say that the uprising in Syria produced an independent Syria. Syria was still under French mandate and largely kind of ruled by the French and by a group of Syrians who were colluding with the French. But the fact of that uprising meant that there were more Syrians involved in kind of running affairs in Syria, which meant that Palestinians involved in kind of fundraising for, provisioning, getting arms for the uprising in Palestine could be based in Damascus, right? So it's that these are kind of, like, we can't look at any one of these struggles in this period and say, like, that was the one that won. You know, that was the one where, like, they got what they wanted. But it's like the constant pushing against these empires forces them to make concessions. And ultimately, like, you know, that's, like, this is a ongoing struggle and a kind of continuous struggle, and we need to kind of keep pushing, not because we think that those concessions are enough, but because those concessions offer more space to maneuver that can then be kind of pushed further out. So that's kind of how, for me, I think about, like, the kind of regional situation in the kind of interwar period.
Well, I don't have too much to add. I think that you both covered a lot of the details. These are very challenging questions and really good questions. I think I would just maybe emphasize something that connects to where you left off, Alex, that I think the question of that, what were the elements that led to perhaps a weakness or a defeat? And you've kind of said this, so I'm almost repeating what you said, but I think in a way, well, there's two things that I would say. Even I've used the word defeat, but I actually think we should say setback, because it is an unfinished revolution. If we can look at this moment, 1936 to 1939, as its own contained moment, but in a way it is actually the beginning of an unfinished revolution. And every victorious revolution, even if it had a moment in which it was defeated, every victorious revolution has had many defeated starts and stops. So in a way, this is a setback. And I think that's helpful for us in the moment that we are in right now, because we've lived through a very dynamic period in the Palestinian struggle. We've witnessed a very dynamic period that has completely transformed the conditions. I mean, before 2023, the question of Palestinian sovereignty felt really very far away. It is not necessarily like it's coming tomorrow, but it has a different place in the political vision of the entire world. So I think we should look at history as kind of a series of setbacks rather than closed chapters. And the elements that made that a setback in that moment, some of it would have to do with certain weaknesses, but those are very easy to see from far away now when we're looking backwards rather than in the moment. Because in the moment, it's not like one revolution that everyone is conscious of the fact that they're making historical action altogether. There's many different forces that have their own agenda that are converging in that moment, and you can't really see until you step away. And then when you step away, you also don't see a lot of the details. So it's a dialectical problem. Some of the weaknesses have already been raised. I mean, the comprador governments in the region, and even elements of the Palestinian national cause, who had a different strategic approach at the time than the peasantry and the working class that was saying, no, we are going to stop the economy until we get what we want. Their strategy for a while was, let's show the British that they should trust us more than the early Zionist forces. Let's actually work with the British. The British are going to give us, so there's different strategic and tactical opinions, and you can see that they have a class basis. The peasantry and the newly urbanizing working class perhaps would say, well, why would we trust the British? We can't even trust the landlord class of our own nation, because they're also participating in the dispossession that we're all experiencing. So you can see the kind of class basis of the different tactical approaches and strategic approaches. And it's not black and white. It's all in motion, and it's all very complicated. And it's not just those internal differences, it's also the many different forces at the time, internationally, regionally, and nationally. So yeah, I would just say that. I think that something we haven't talked about too much, but I'm glad you raised it, and I think it's something we should think about for why we study this history right now. The Palestinian Revolution is an ongoing one, it's an unfinished one. And these different chapters, not just 1936, but also 1948 and 1967, all these different chapters that are more like turning points rather than closed chapters, can help us learn more about how revolutionary movement can actually be generated and take place.
So we are close to time. We have about 5 minutes. I just want to give the chance, if there's one, we can take one or two questions. We have one here.
Hi, thank you so much. Layan, you mentioned that Ghassan Kanafani was one of the first people who applied a Marxist framework to analyze the peasants' revolt. And I know that around that time as well, in a lot of African Marxists were button heads with more Western traditional Marxists, especially Fanon, who labeled the peasantry as the only spontaneous revolutionary force in these African countries, both that gained independence or that were still under colonization. And so I wonder if that was also factored into Ghassan Kanafani's analysis of the peasants' revolt, knowing that, for instance, from like a Fanonian perspective, it was that the peasantry was the only group of people in a colonized country or in an African country that was previously colonized that were able to lead the revolution, or like that was the site of the revolution instead of like the proletariat. And then another point, Ustad Khalid, to what you mentioned about like how this time is a serious moment for questioning our ability to struggle to get out of this paralysis that we're in. And I know you also mentioned logarithmic oppression. I was just thinking about how, for instance, in the case of Gaza, when lavender was deployed and used to murder thousands of Palestinians, Palantir, before creating Lavender for the IOF, they had access to so much data about American citizens and about citizens of other countries where they had deals with their governments. And so initially, before I was aware of all of this, I used to think, okay, like these tools are tested on people in Gaza and then deployed in other places of the world. But in fact, we help these companies build these models with our data that we sometimes willingly, sometimes unwillingly share with them. And then these products and these tools are tested on people in Gaza, people in other countries, and then repackaged and tested on us as well. And so, yeah, so thank you so much.
Okay, no more questions from the audience? I think that those are a great set of questions, and I'll just ask really brief engagement with them, although it might be difficult, so because they're really rich questions. So maybe a minute.
I can try in 1 minute, even though I think that's quite impossible. But actually, it's a really good question, and I wish we had another hour to talk about it all together. But I would say that that's a really good that you've pointed that out that's actually one of the key contributions that this text makes. It's an example of applying a Marxist method to analyze to a historical moment, to analyze it, rather than a very linear application of what maybe one interpretation of Marxism would be. So, for example, I don't know if it's necessarily that Western or European or North American Marxists were butting heads with at the time called the Third World, but it was actually more that the time that Kanafani was writing, the actual practice of Marxism, which had at the time, there was been so much revolutionary activity in Europe, was moving east. And part of that was because of the success of the revolution in Russia, the Bolshevik Revolution, that then they actually focused on cultivating relationships with the East also and the South. And the previously colonized nations were standing up and saying, we want to fight against the colonists, and found Marxism to be a very useful tool in waging anti-colonial struggle. And that's why most anti-colonial struggles, even if they are not explicitly Marxist or explicitly socialist, you'll find very strong elements of Marxist practice inside those movements, because at the time that was really where Marxism was living. And one of the things that happened, because it was living in those areas that are not European or highly developed, they're colonial countries that don't have the same kind of industrial working class as the metropole does, that doesn't have the same social relations. And so you have to put the Marxist method, which is to look at all the different kinds of conditions, to have a historical process to understand the conditions, and a very systematic scientific approach to those conditions, to then see how society is organized and then how to mobilize it. So it's, Kanafani was one of the people who really put that in a way that people could see how he was doing it, as well as the African Marxists like Amilcar Cabral and others who said, okay, I am applying. They didn't see it as a contradiction to Marxism, because it wasn't. It was Marx used that method in Europe, which is why he resulted in this conclusion about the urbanized proletariat in the industrialized countries. To use that method in another place would come to a different conclusion, but also the same kind of, it's a way of analyzing society so that you can take a step forward to actually act, rather than just kind of diagnose the problem and leave it there. Sorry, that was more than 1 minute.
Either of you want just a minute to respond, or we close?
I don't think I can add anything to that. And I think this point about the ways in which we're all the Palantir and use of AI, and the way kind of facial recognition in Minnesota is connected to genocide in Gaza. I think it's important for us not to continue to think of these things as connected and interlinked, and we need to kind of struggle on all fronts.
Okay, and so I don't know, Khaled, if you wanted to share a final point.
Yes, I think to conclude, I think we have to go to the big questions. Does revolutions end or fail? I don't think a great revolution like the 1936 revolution has failed in the sense of, it's failed on the sense of the political, and let's say, if we want to take the unit of analysis as the post-colonial state. It didn't produce a post-colonial state, and that's good if we want to take it on the wider picture, because the failure of the Palestinian movement to produce a post-colonial state in any shape of it was let's say, the continuous factor in the upheaval in all the Arab world until this day. And I think always that if we succeeded in a way or another in establishing a puppet state in Palestine, I think the regional, imperial, global order will be very stable in these days. But the failure produced another historical success. It always meant that this area, what was engineered in the Sykes-Picot Accords, it won't last because the implanting Israel in this area would always produce conflicts and always will be tensions with the question of borders, and that we always see in any struggle. In Palestine, the question of borders always rise up, and in these days we'll see that the Palestinian issue is not, it's an issue about the whole area. It's not the issue about getting a Palestinian state. I think it is impossible to get a Palestinian state in any shape or another. I think what will happen, the Palestinian cause, the final solution for the Palestinian cause will be reshaping what it's called the Middle East again. And the AI question, I think it's very important subject to be addressed, because what is happening today is a culmination of about 25 years of developing tools that was done in the frame of the war on terror. Distant war by drones brought with it what was called the pattern of life analysis. If you want to target something, you have to know the pattern of the life that's surrounded by the target that you want to engage with. And this it meant that it's not just collecting data about the target itself. You have to collect data about the whole social system the target is included in. And so there started this dynamic of big data that everybody is talking about. You have to collect data and more data. And if you collect more data, you can produce more models for targeting people. And afterwards, we saw the collapse of this theory in October 23, because a lot of data flood meant that you cannot recognize noise from real data. And this gave another, let's say, opening in this colonial system that something can be done. And even in Gaza, that is the world's most intensified, civilized place on earth, by a lot of a matrix of sensors, of aerial surveillance, of sensors on the ground and whatever, and something could be done there. I think will give us a lesson that this system cannot last if we, think of the limits and not playing on the same playground and the same rules that the system wants us to play. And we are, in fact, working for free for all the AI companies. We are giving them free training for their data. Everyone of us is using the internet or the social networks, training their models, large language models, for free. And I think this is, when we're talking about the Marxist analysis, here we have, they are using all of us of free labor. But I think that the thing that what I want to conclude, the 1936 revolution gave us a big promise, an idea, and the ability that people, if they are organized, they can, challenge an empire. And this lesson can be taken and reintroduced to our struggles these days.
Thank you. I think this point is important to end on. The 1936 revolution, it started a struggle that's still ours today, and studying it seriousness makes us sharper and stronger. And with that, I hope to see you all on March 18th, 6 p.m. here at TPF for a conversation between the director of Palestine 36, Annemarie Jacir, and Jihad Abu Salem. And thank you to our panelists for this really great discussion and insight into this period of history.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
إلى فلسطين خذوني معكم إلى ربا حزينة كوجه مجدلية إلى القباب الخضر والحجارة النبية 20 عاما وأنا أبحث عن أرض وعن هوية 20 عاما وأنا أبحث عن أرض وعن هوية أبحث عن بيتي الذي هناك عن وطن المحاط بالأسلاك أبحث عن طفولتي وعن رفاق حارتي أبحث